Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Persistence Outdoors podcast. It's Samuel Allred on the mic, and today we're going to talk about one of the best big game cartridges of all time. It's something of a living legend. At nearly 120 years old, if you head out into the field today, it's not unlikely that you'll meet someone using this cartridge. We're talking about, of course, the 30-06. The 30-06 is a bona fide big game killer, and in some ways, it's the cartridge that all other North American big game cartridges are measured against. Today, I'm going to give you my take on this venerable cartridge and talk about why I chose it for my first big game rifle, and why I think it's actually a great cartridge for new hunters. To set the stage, I'll give you a little backstory so you can understand some of the factors that influenced my decision when choosing my first big game rifle. When I was growing up, there wasn't really a hunting tradition in my family, so I didn't own a rifle. And before my family got into elk hunting, we hunted birds, upland birds, ducks, but nothing really with a rifle. It wasn't until we started elk hunting, maybe when I was 15 or 16, that I actually had an opportunity to hunt with a rifle. And even when I was hunting with a rifle, it wasn't my own, and I didn't really feel comfortable or proficient with it. Well, fast forward to my early 20s, I'm out of college. I didn't really hunt in college, but I'm looking to get back into it. And I'm living in Tennessee, where there's just so many opportunities to hunt white-tailed deer. Well, my grandpa had given a 30-30 lever action rifle to my older brother, and I knew my older brother wasn't using it. So I asked him if I could take that 30-30 and go hunt with it, and he was fine with that. So I took it. I shot it a lot. And with this 30-30 Winchester, this was the first time that I had a chance to really get comfortable behind a rifle. I was shooting with open sights. I wasn't shooting long range. My groups were something like 6 inches at 100 yards, both a product of my shooting and the rifle and trying to use open sights at that distance. So nothing amazing, but at least I was able to then actually spend some time behind the rifle and get comfortable with it. And I felt confident to go hunting with it pretty much for the first time. I had a successful hunt with that rifle, kind of my first season back into big game hunting, shot a deer with it, felt really good. That holiday season, it came up that that rifle was not my grandpa's rifle to give. It was actually my uncle's that my grandpa was holding on to for him. So my uncle wanted the rifle back, and all of a sudden, I was out of a hunting rifle. At this point, it was pretty clear that I needed to buy my own rifle, and I wanted to. I knew I was going to hunt. I was really excited about my opportunities in the future, so I was ready to buy my own rifle. And that brings me to choosing the cartridge for my first big game rifle of my own. I had some basic criteria for the cartridge, which I think are applicable for most new hunters and people who are buying a big game rifle for the first time. I wanted something that I could shoot a lot. And what I mean is I wanted something that had manageable recoil and had affordable and readily available ammo. I also knew that this would likely be my only big game rifle. I'm on a budget and I don't have the money to just buy more and more rifles. So I wanted the rifle to be capable for any big game I wanted to hunt. Though I was in Tennessee at the time, I had a pretty good idea that I'd be heading back west and that I would have opportunities to hunt elk in the future. So I wanted my big game rifle to be capable of taking elk comfortably. So let's break down those criteria a little bit. First of all, something that I can shoot a lot. At the time, I knew how to shoot rifles, but I wasn't necessarily proficient. So I wanted something that I could practice with. That ruled out some of the bigger Magnum cartridges for two reasons. First of all, the ammo for a bigger Magnum cartridge often costs more just because you have more material in that cartridge. The bigger Magnum cartridges also have high recoil. And while most shooters can learn to manage that recoil, I wanted something that I was sure I could easily master and not be cowed or caused to flinch by heavy recoil. So I wanted something that I could afford to shoot when I wanted to, and also something that when I went out to shoot, I could shoot well, learn good shooting mechanics, and have good form and shoot comfortably over and over again and not get to a point where I felt really uncomfortable shooting the rifle. People talk about with their 300 Winchester Magnum how it's a great big game rifle, but going out to sight it in after 20 shots, their shoulder is really sore. So I wanted to avoid that, and that kind of ruled out some of those bigger Magnum cartridges. It also ruled out some of those cartridges that are a little bit more fancy or unique that I might have to hand load for. I wanted ammunition that was readily available, even in ammo shortages, and I wasn't a hand loader and wasn't ready to make that investment, so I didn't want something that I would only be able to hand load. Now, a 30-06 fit the bill really well. You can buy a box of 30-06 ammo at Walmart for $27. That's really scraping the bottom as far as price is concerned for a big game rifle. You'll only be rivaled by maybe a 308, maybe a 6.5 Creedmoor. Being able to get a box of 20 cartridges for $27 is really a great deal for a capable big game cartridge. And it means that I was able to practice with it a lot more than if that ammo was more expensive. Most people agree that the 30-06 also has very reasonable recoil. It's considered about the highest recoil that an average shooter can shoot comfortably. And for me, as an average size, slightly small person, I thought that was about as high as I wanted to go in recoil, again, so that I could build good shooting mechanics and be able to practice a lot without getting overly uncomfortable. My second criteria was all about elk. If I was only hunting something like white-tailed deer, I could have used all sorts of cartridges just fine and probably wouldn't have made a huge difference whether I went with something like a 6.5 Creedmoor or a 308 or a 30-06. But elk are notoriously tough animals, and generally, heavier bullet weights are best for elk. With a heavier bullet, you generally get better penetration, and it allows you to get a pass-through or at least a killing shot on an elk where you have to penetrate much further than you would on a smaller animal. 30-06s are classically loaded with a 180 grain bullet, and that's just known to be a great load for a 30-06. And even with old style cup and core bullets like your Remington Core Locked or your Federal Power Shock, the 30-06 can still get it done on an elk with that heavier bullet that provides good penetration. Something I've learned since owning a 30-06 is that it has slower impact velocities than some of the modern cartridges today, and that actually works well for those old cup and core bullets like your Core Locked, because it means the bullet doesn't pancake on impact or break apart the way that it might if it was kicked out at a higher velocity. So knowing this is again another benefit for the budget-minded hunter, because you can actually go and have good success within reasonable ranges with good shot placement, of course, but you can have good success with these lower quality bullets that are going to cost you less at the checkout counter. The 30-06, of course, is a known elk killer. People might argue that there are better cartridges for elk. There probably are, but nobody's going to argue that a 30-06 within reasonable ranges is going to get the job done. So I felt pretty comfortable going with the 30-06, but it did rule out some of the smaller cartridges for me. So something like a 243 or a 6.5 Creedmoor, something like that, which sure, you could hunt elk with them, reasonable ranges, right bullet in the right place, but they're just not as capable for big-bodied game as the 30-06. So we've talked about shootability, the recoil and the price of ammo, and also ammo availability. We've talked about the fact that I wanted a cartridge that would capably kill elk. But there's always the question, especially if you're deliberative and consider all your options like me. For someone considering a 30-06, there's always the question of why not get a 308? Because a 308 shoots similar bullets, it has a little bit less recoil, it might have even better ammo prices and availability than the 30-06. So why not get a 308? When I started shopping for a rifle in Tennessee, this was the question I got a lot. The 308 is kind of the quintessential deer hunting rifle, maybe rivaled by the 30-30 in Tennessee, but it's the kind of gun that a father would pass down to their son, and it was completely capable for pretty much anything you want to do in Tennessee, right? So I was looking for a gun, and gun clerks would ask me what I'm looking for, and I say, oh, I'm looking for a 30-06. And they would say, what do you need that for? And I would tell them I knew I was going to hunt elk again in the future, and I wanted that capability. And the response I would get inevitably was, a 308 would probably work for elk. And that's true. A 308 can be used to hunt elk. But there's a few reasons I wanted a 30-06 over a 308. A 30-06 has a slight ballistic advantage over a 308 with the same bullets. So it usually shoots the same bullets about 100 feet per second faster. If you zero a 30-06 at 200 yards, the 308 will drop about 2 inches further at 300 yards than the 30-06. And the 308 just loses velocity a little bit quicker than the 30-06, which can affect your downrange energy and bullet expansion and all of that. Now, that slight ballistic advantage was especially important to me because I use the maximum point blank range method when I'm hunting. Let me explain this a little in case you're unfamiliar. The maximum point blank range, in simple terms, is just the furthest distance at which you can aim your rifle at the center of your target, not adjusting for bullet drop, pull the trigger, and still hit your target. So to unpack this a little, when I zero my 30-06 at 200 yards, I know that the bullet will impact a little bit high, about 2 inches high at 100 yards, and about 2 inches low at 230 yards. So if I'm hunting white-tailed deer and the deer has a 6-inch vital zone, and I aim at the center of that vital zone, even if my bullet hits 2 inches high or 2 inches low, I'm still going to make a kill on that deer, assuming I made a good shot. So the maximum point blank range method allows you to make quick shots out to a predetermined distance. For me, it's about 230 yards. If I know the animal is within 230 yards, I can just put my sights directly in the center of the kill zone on that animal and make a shot, and chances are I'm going to kill that animal. You can adjust your maximum point blank range by zeroing your rifle at different distances, and it can be further for larger targets. So say with an elk-sized animal, maybe I'm okay with the bullet being 3 inches high at 100 yards and 3 inches low at maybe 275 yards. Since the elk has a much larger vital zone, even if you hit 3 inches high or 3 inches low, you're still likely to kill that animal. It's not a perfectly precise system, but it helps you to make quick shots in the field or to hunt when you don't have a rangefinder. When you're talking about a 308 versus a 30-06, the ballistic advantages of the 30-06 give it a little bit more potential for a further maximum point blank range. It's probably something like 25 to 50 yards further than your 308. And for a little bit more recoil, I thought that was worth it. The 30-06 is also slightly better for shooting heavy for caliber bullets. Some people would say much better for shooting heavy for caliber bullets. And there's a number of different reasons for that. First of all, the 30-06 is factory loaded with bullets from 125 grains all the way up to 220 grains. Your 200 to 220 grains would be good choices for really big game like moose or bison. People say you could even use them for grizzly bears. Might not be your best choice, but it is an option, right? The 308 usually tops out at a 180 grain bullet. And the 308's bread and butter is really the 150 grain. And some people report having accuracy problems with those heavier 180 grain bullets in a 308. This could be for a couple reasons. Heavier bullets are longer, making them harder to stabilize, and many 308s have a 1 in 12 twist barrel, whereas 30-06s usually have a 1 in 10 twist barrel. That faster twist rate will help stabilize those slightly longer bullets. Longer bullets also have to be seated further down in the 308 cartridge case, and that seating depth and reduced powder charge has the potential to affect accuracy. Now, with traditional cup and core bullets like that 180 grain core locked, you might not see much of a difference, but I think especially with advancements in bullet design these days, you can start to see some separation between the 30-06 with those heavier, longer bullets and the 308. With a slight ballistic advantage and a slight preference for heavier bullets, I decided that the 30-06 was right for me. I knew I could comfortably hunt elk with it. If I wanted to or had the opportunity to, I could hunt big bears or moose or other animals with it and load it up with some of those heavier bullets. And that versatility is really what sold it for me. And I think that's why it's gone down in history as one of the best big game cartridges of all time. To add some icing to the cake, I'll tell you a couple things that I learned later after purchasing my 30-06 rifle. The 30-06 can hold 4 down and 1 in the chamber in your Remington 700 style rifle. Your bigger Magnum cartridges and some of the short fats can't hold that many down in the magazine. And so that slightly higher ammo capacity, obviously as hunters, we're trying to make a one-shot kill, but it can be nice to have that additional ammunition capacity in the magazine when things get Western. 30-06s also with their streamlined profile and that not as sharp shoulder, they feed very reliably. They were made as a battle cartridge, right? And so they feed very well in a way that some of these other more modern short fat cartridges don't. So those are two great benefits of the cartridge as well. You can also find so many rifles, new and old rifles, chambered for the 30-06. And so many people use it that if you ever ran out of ammo, you might be able to borrow some ammo from a friend and keep hunting. Those are great benefits of the 30-06 as well. Even at nearly 120 years old, all these attributes of the 30-06 make it still a viable and useful cartridge today. And I think those attributes of being shootable, having good ammunition availability and low cost, and manageable recoil, I think those are all really important for a first big game rifle or for a new hunter. Just for fun though, let's touch on some other cartridges that might work for you if you don't have the same exact criteria that I did. If you're not hunting elk, there's lots of other cartridges out there that will do what the 30-06 does for you with a little bit less recoil and also still be affordable and have lots of ammo availability. The first one we talked about is the 308. Soon after the 308 was introduced in the 1950s, NATO adopted a very similar cartridge, the 7.62 by 51. And with the full weight of the military behind that cartridge, the 308 was pretty much guaranteed success. So even to this day, the price of 308 ammo is pretty low, and you can just find it anywhere. So the 308 has a little bit less recoil than the 30-06. You're giving a little bit up in terms of ballistics, but if you're deer hunting and you don't want to deal with the recoil of the 30-06, why not get a 308? You could also get something like a 270, which is a lot like a 30-06 necked down to a slightly smaller diameter bullet. That 270 is going to be a capable deer rifle. If you are hunting deer a lot and you think you might step up to elk sometime, a 270 would also work. It has very good ballistics. It's capable of taking elk, although it might not be a preferred elk cartridge by most. And then you could also go down to the famous 6.5 Creedmoor. The 6.5 Creedmoor is going to have even less recoil, and it's known for accuracy. So that's a great option for medium-sized game. You could also look at something like a 30-30. Any of these older cartridges, I call them legacy cartridges. Any of these legacy cartridges are going to be a little bit cheaper than the newer short fats like your 6.5 PRC or your 7 PRC, and a little bit more affordable and comfortable to shoot than your magnums like your 300 Winchester Magnum. So any of these legacy cartridges could be a good choice for your first hunting rifle. All right, well, it's been fun to talk about the 30-06. Comparing cartridges is kind of an endless source of fascination that I don't really understand, because at some point you're just using the same sort of data over and over again in different iterations, but for whatever reason, it's just a fun conversation. One interesting thing I noticed is that often when I'm reviewing gear that I have, I come out of the process not liking my gear as much. So, for example, I was reviewing a backpack a while ago, and the backpack is great. It served me well. I've had lots of good adventures with it. But coming out of the review, I started to notice some of its downsides. It doesn't have a meat shelf. It has pretty small capacity for the type of things that I want to do. And so I felt a little bit more frustrated with the backpack after reviewing it and thinking about it critically than when I had it before, which isn't a great outcome, but that's the way it is sometimes. Interestingly enough, with the 30-06, I've actually come to like it a little bit more after going through this process about thinking of its attributes. Besides very long range shooting, there's just not much that it can't do. As I wrap up here, I'll leave you with a final thought, and that is, don't get wrapped up in the technicalities and the dogma for one cartridge over another. There's so many cartridges out there. Chances are you'll find a cartridge that you'll be really happy with. And more important any day than the cartridge is where you put that bullet. Shot placement trumps cartridge any day. So whatever you choose, make sure to practice with it. Make sure to become proficient with it. And that's going to help you more than any tiny ballistic variation in the dozens of cartridges that are out there. So find something that works for you and get out and hunt. That's all for today. I'll catch you next week.